me know when you're good to go. Testing 1, 2, David Crisafulli, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I'm just going to start with a couple of quick high-level things and hand over to David. Yesterday we predicted that the infrastructure funding would fall, and that's been the case. Today, there's a couple of things that we really want to highlight. One of them is the trickery with the Titles Office, which is not just dodgy accounting, it's just plain and simply wrong. And we have to call that out for what it is. Another is a return to surplus after the next election, using figures with downgraded expenses at the 11th hour after the next election. But the thing I want to talk about is the thing that Queenslanders have been talking about to me, and that is this so-called $2 billion fund for the hospitals. If you look at Budget Paper 2, there is nothing. There is nothing until after the next election of any tangible amount to fix the health crisis. And it has been the thing that Queenslanders have been screaming out. And in fact, if you look at the capital figures, health is less this year than it was last year. Less this year in capital expenditure than it was last year. There is no fund. So when Queenslanders are stuck on an ambulance, waiting for a hospital bed, ramped, they will remember this pretend fund, and it won't deliver $1 or one new idea to fix the health crisis in Queensland. And we owe it to Queenslanders to call that out and keep fighting until the situation is fixed. Over to David to talk about some of the numbers.
Thanks, David. So we've just walked out of the Parliament after hearing the budget, and what we've seen from this budget is some disappointment and some trickery. What we've seen is revenues up, but debt continues to be at record levels. We've seen cuts to infrastructure. That's $4 billion across the forwards. That is cuts to infrastructure at a time when we have a growing population and the Olympic Games in the pipeline. That is a disturbing trend for the Queensland economy. One of the key things that David has just mentioned has been the valuation in the titles registry. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Treasurer stood in the Parliament and said that the titles registry was valued at $4.2 billion. Now, just a couple of weeks later, the titles office has now been valued at nearly $8 billion. You contrast with New South Wales and Victoria that sold their titles registries at that are substantially larger for around $2.6 and $2.8 billion just a couple of years ago. You need to find a pretty big sucker to pay overs of that magnitude, and the Treasurer has found himself. So what we have seen now is some trickery with the titles registry, and we're going to spend the next day or two digging a little bit deeper into the budget, because it is a budget that has lots of funding promises that are beyond the forwards, billion-dollar black holes. We're going to be digging a little bit deeper, because this is a budget that is deep in deception. And Queenslanders need to know the depth of that deception, and we'll be spending the next couple of days highlighting that for them. Happy to take any questions. So this is a budget of lost opportunities, and the government has failed to set out a clear pathway to address spending and, more importantly, to address debt. What we've seen on the public service is a lack of vision. So we know that now the Treasurer is going to rework the Charter of Fiscal Responsibility. He's going to rewrite the rules, whether it be on the public service, whether it be on how different information is disclosed. So we're going to be looking deeply into that new Charter of Fiscal Responsibility and work out how the Treasurer has been rewriting the rules to suit his particular message today.
This year, 44% of revenue will be spent paying the wages of public servants. Is the INP comfortable with that sort of ratio? Would you like to see that increase?
What we want to see is the right priorities. And we saw in the budget in December, 2/3 of the new borrowing that was undertaken by the Treasurer at the time was dedicated to keeping the lights on, just managing day-to-day affairs of government, and only 1/3 was dedicated towards infrastructure, whether it be economic or social infrastructure. We're going to be looking into this budget now to determine where is the money being spent. We need the money being spent in wealth-creating, job-creating infrastructure. That's one of the reasons why the cut to infrastructure is so troubling, but one of the reasons also why we're going to spend some time digging deeper into the detail.
But I'm not so much talking about debt, I'm talking about spending on the wage bill. Are you comfortable with that? 44% of revenue?
The wage bill is the wage bill. What we are concerned about is the money across the forwards in infrastructure spending that can create jobs, create wealth across Queensland, deliver better services. As we know, there's a hospital and health crisis, there's youth justice, there's housing. It's a question of where is the money going to be best spent, and that's where we'll be looking into the expenditure lines in the days ahead.
So reining in that spend isn't a priority?
What's a priority right now is to hold the government to account. They've just delivered their second budget in 6 months. We have seen debt at record levels, continuing to grow. We've seen a surplus beyond the next election that's been announced today. The only way they're getting there is putting expenses below CPI in the fourth year to get to that alleged surplus. There are a range of areas that this government needs to be held to account. We're going to be looking at expenditure lines very carefully. We're going to be looking at costs, and we'll be detailing them further in the days ahead.
What parts of the budget did you like?
Look, I think what we're seeing is that the people of Queensland are bouncing back. You know, we're seeing people wanting to move here. That's great for our state. It's a great place to be living, and it's pleasing to see people wanting to move here. We know the housing market is strong. We know retail spending is strong, and that's being led by the people of Queensland. They have confidence in our future, and right now we need a government that is ready to support that confidence, build on that confidence, because by any measure, if you look at ComSec, we're sixth in the country. If you look at bankruptcies, we've got the worst number of bankruptcies in the country. So there is a place for government to be building confidence, picking up ideas and running with them. And that's where this budget, on first glance, is full of trickery but not much vision.
You laughed at the $4 billion estimation of titles registry. Now that it's doubled, what's your response?
Look, it's just a couple of weeks ago where we stood in the Parliament during consideration in detail and asked the Treasurer basic questions about the valuation of the titles registry. At the time it was $4.2 billion. We were asking questions of the earnings multiple that went into that particular valuation, what's the actual revenue derived out of the titles office. So we had been asking those questions and the Treasurer could not answer a single one during consideration in detail. Now, less than 3 weeks later, the Treasurer announces that the titles registry is now nearly doubled in value to $7.8 billion, at a time when New South Wales and Victoria titles registry offices had sold for much, much less, 2.6 and 2.8 billion. Where has the valuation come from? The Treasurer has said a couple of the valuers that have undertaken it, but they can only act on the best information that they're given. So whether that, what we would love to see are the assumptions, some of the information that's been provided to these agencies, because right now we've got no confidence that valuation is anything but trickery to get the Treasurer out of a jam.
And just on the 4-year path to surplus, specifically what in the plan outlined today makes you think that that's not a feasible reality?
Look, we're going to dig a bit deeper in the next couple of days, but in the final year, to be putting expenses at a level below CPI just to achieve a surplus is misleading. And it's just another one of the sleights of hand, one of the tricks the government has utilised in this budget. You know, that surplus, if ever achieved, is beyond the next election. So there is a lot of water to flow under the bridge, and we're going to spend the next couple of days going through some of those details as well. But you know, if that's a surplus that's going to be delivered, there is a lot of work for the Treasurer to do, and we've got no confidence that the Treasurer will be able to do it. Right now, the question is, what is the debt comprised of? as I've already stated, if it is debt merely just to keep the lights on, to keep the wheels of government turning, increasing debt, that is a concern. What we need debt to be prioritising are those infrastructure projects right across the state, from the Cairns Ring Road, Hells Gate, in my part of the world, a new Toowoomba Hospital, the Coomera Connector, wherever you might be, wherever I travel, there are clear infrastructure projects that need to be invested in that can build wealth for the state, create jobs and deliver better services. That's the kind of debt that is worth undertaking, but not simply to keep the lights on.
The Treasurer said in this speech that that's no longer a dirty word. That's something you would agree with?
Right across the Western world, right across the globe, debt has been used to work through some of the worst impacts of COVID-19 and the economic recovery. So there is no doubt that debt plays a role in bouncing back our economies. What I'm most concerned about with the Queensland debt is what it is comprised of. As I've said, if it's debt that goes towards easing congestion on the roads, delivering better health services in our hospitals, or building dams that can create agricultural wealth, that's debt worth pursuing, but not a debt that simply maintains the day-to-day operations of government. We need to be focusing on the right kind of debt.
Hey everybody.
Great. Thanks, folks.